Many years ago, before the near-death days beyond recall, was born a bundle of bouncing joy that his parents named Theophilus. Theophilus. Theophilus means lover of God. I'm sure they called him Theo. There was a tailor in Towns County that lived on the river, go back, named Ben Taylor, who was an invalid in his later life. And he couldn't do much but read and write, and that is what he did from day to night. It kept his mind busy and off the hardships that he had underwent, he said. So a lot of this stuff I'm using from Ben Taylor's description of the Taylor race that you have. Are there any more of those papers? Are there any more back there?
Yeah.
If anybody doesn't have one, Mary Ann's got one for you. It's a pretty neat little story about the description of the Taylor race.
Sure.
Yes. Okay. All right.
Stand over to the side, you're blocking the screen. One side or the other.
Boy, can't please anybody. Okay, so Ben Taylor wrote a description of the Taylor race, and he said, "As my mind is sound and my heart beats true, and realizing what I do, I take my trusty pen in hand to describe the Taylors the best I can." So that's what I'm going to do tonight, as it applies to the branch of the Taylors that I know the most about, the Towns County. And then the one of the Towns County branches is mine, Jeremiah. Guess who I'm named after? His grandson was Jeremiah. Guess who I'm named after? And that one's great uncle, way back 200 years ago, was Jeremiah. So they knew that name, Jeremiah, in the Taylor race. And if they didn't name their kid Jeremiah, they named him John. And if they didn't name him John, they named him William. So there's just William, John, and Jerry. William, John, and Jerry, all over the place. Okay. So Theophilus, that little kid that was born in 1759, we do not know his father. We do not know his mother. We do not even know his wife's name. She's just Mrs. Theo Taylor, even though she has a tombstone that gives her a name. But there's no documentation that that's her name. And I won't even tell you what's on her tombstone because you'll think that's her name. And it's not, even though it's written in stone over in Karnes Creek in Stevens County, Georgia. So Theophilus and Mrs. Theophilus. So when he applied for a pension for service in the Revolutionary War, he said he was born in 1759 in Virginia. But being so young, he didn't remember where. I'm sure you don't either, do you? Well, he put it in writing that he didn't know where. Theo started out in Virginia. Then his parents moved to Montgomery County, North Carolina. They lived there a while, and he was in the Revolution from Montgomery County and Anson County, North Carolina. After considerable time, they moved to Chesterfield County, South Carolina, where Theo, raised his family. One of his sons was a William Taylor, 1789 to 1857. William moved to the North Fork of the Broad River over in what's Stevens County now. Back in that day and time, it was Franklin County and Habersham County and different counties. But it's today Stevens County, the North Fork of the Broad River. I've been there and checked out the North Fork of the Broad River. It's not all that impressive. So they're both buried at Karnes Creek Cemetery in Stevens County. And if you can see his wife's name on that tombstone, can you read his wife's name?
His wife.
How beautiful! Oh, this is William Taylor, and this is his wife. And if that's not pitiful enough that she didn't even get her name on the tombstone, it says she died in 1862. Truth is, she was dead by the 1860 census. So not only is her name not right, her date of death is not right. Okay, so they lived on the North Fork of the Broad River over there. And they had a whole bunch of kids. You know, people that couldn't afford slaves had kids. So they had a whole passel of kids. And one of them was named Jeremiah. One of them was named John. Okay, so since we're on John, we'll just talk about John. There's John on the right, and there's Mrs. John. But she had a name. She had a name. Her name was Martha, and she was a Wheeler. Her father died way back when, but her mother lived and moved to Towns County. Her mother's name was Susan Wheeler. And if you've ever been to Deer Lodge, you know there's a little gap right there at Deer Lodge. Does anybody know what the name of that gap is?
Sookie Gap.
Yes, Sookie Gap. Who said that? Okay. That is Sookie Gap. Now, back in the day, they were bad at nicknaming, just as they are today. And if a woman's name was Susan or Susanna, guess what her nickname was? Sookie. That gap is named for Martha Taylor's mother, Susan Wheeler. Sookie Gap. There's not many of those Wheeler. I don't know that there's any of those Wheeler descendants around today, but you probably remember Lily Nichols, that was a nurse at the hospital for ages. She comes from Sookie Wheeler. And most of them moved away, but anyhow, the only one that I can think of is Lily Nichols that you might know. Okay, so this is John Taylor. By the way, who in here knows they come from John Taylor? Jerry Kendall comes from John Taylor. Bill Kendall comes from John Taylor. There's others I saw come in, but I can't see in the dark. So, who was John Taylor? He was born in 1813 in Haberstown, but it's now Stevens, and raised on the North Fork of the Broad River. Yeah, and he was in the Cherokee War, which means that he was in the militia that actually helped the Indians relocate to the west. Yeah, he didn't leave the state; he just helped them a few miles. I think it said 117 miles in his pension. I'm not really sure that. But anyhow, he didn't leave the state. He got a pension for that service, and he got bounty land for that service. And his widow got a widow's pension for that service. And he's buried at Mount Zion, where most of those Taylors all went to church, except the part of them that lived on Owl Creek went to Pleasant Hill, I think was the name of it. Pleasant Hill. Bet you never heard of Pleasant Hill Church, have you? It was the little log house in the Soapstone Gap that was a one-room school and a church. Jeremiah Taylor was the clerk. Ben Garrett was the preacher. And so how was Owl Creek big enough to have a separate church than Mount Zion? Because back in the day, the Hiwassee River community and Owl Creek and Soapstone were thriving communities. You know, today everybody leaves to go to work. Well, back then people moved to Hiwassee River, Owl Creek, and Soapstone to work. Wonder what there was to work at. Logging. The timber business. The timber business. All right. Tim Taylor said that he was a member of the Baptist Church and lived a good, quiet life. He reared a large family and respectable family and was liked and respected by all who knew him. And his children were James, who moved to Marietta, William, who died in 1863. His tombstone's up at Mount Zion. He was born in 1846. He died in 1863. He's not on any Civil War enlistment roster that I can find, but it looks mighty suspicious to me that he died in 1863. I think he must have gone off to the war somehow or the other, and died and got back home. The next one was John Jr. who moved to Colorado and Montana. Those Taylors were big at moving west. The next one was Brunetta, who moved to Banks County. Then there was not Alpharetta, but Mayretta. Mayretta married Dr. Nelson Wood. They lived at Akewan, North Carolina, out there. I think that's Jackson County. And you probably know Ramona Nichols. She comes from Mayretta. The Barnards down on the lower end of the county come from Mayretta. Or maybe it's Murrieta. No, Murrieta. All right. Then Julia married William Smith, and they moved to Texas. Let's see. Julia, who married the Smith, had a son named Robert Thomas Smith, who was born 1878, right up there on the river. Now, that name may not mean much to you, but Robert Thomas Smith from Towns County, Georgia, up on Hiawassee River, was born 1876, and his family moved to Texas. He became an American thoroughbred racehorse trainer. As a young man, he trained horses for the United States Cavalry, and he worked on a cattle ranch. And in 1934, he was hired as a trainer by the wealthy businessman Charles S. Howard. Does anybody know what famous horse he trained or was the keeper of? Tell it, Jerry.
Seabiscuit.
Seabiscuit. Yes, Seabiscuit. Seabiscuit's trainer was from right here. He's one of our famous ones. Pretty neat, huh? And he comes from John Taylor. And all you people that's in here that's from John Taylor, he's your cousin. All right. Okay, my branch of the Taylors lived on Fodder Creek. And the reason they lived on Fodder Creek is that one of those Owl Creek Taylors, named Jeremiah, discovered there was a pathway from Owl Creek through Jones Gap to Fodder Creek. Where lived Rosa Jane Nichols. And so it kind of took, and they married. So he moved. He's the only one of them that moved over Jones Gap, Fodder Creek. So that's the ones I'm mostly familiar with. So when I started trying to find out about Taylors, I went to the Taylor reunion. I'd never been to a Taylor reunion. I didn't know they even had them, but I found out about it and I went. And I met at that time the oldest. I think it's not only the oldest Taylor. He might have been the oldest person in Towns County. I don't know. Anyhow, he was the oldest Taylor, and that was James Andrew, otherwise known as Jim Taylor. Is anybody in here from Jim Taylor? There they are. Is it? Okay. So there's Jim Taylor. I met him, and I think if I'm thinking right, he had a daughter that was there that had the youngest Taylor at that reunion there. So anyhow, okay. So Jim Taylor, and so there was another one of the Taylors from the river that was in law enforcement. His name was James Enoch Taylor. And he was a deputy sheriff for Towns County who gave his life in the line of duty on September the 11th, 1981. And there's a plaque for him in the courthouse. I guess they'll take it down in this courthouse renovation and put it back somewhere else. I guess they'll have to. Whatever. So there's James Taylor. Let me see if we've got anything else on old John Taylor. Okay. So Julia that married the Smith, that's where we got to. Child number 7 was Bud Hannon. He went to Texas. Child number 8 was Andrew. He went to Whitewater, Colorado and became a rancher. Number 9 was Josephine, who married, anybody know? Benjamin Larkin Kendall, and Jerry and Mr. Kendall there are descendants of them. Child number 10 was Sarah Jane, who married James Patton and moved to Texas. Child number 11 was Alice, and she married that Patton's brother, Thomas. They moved all the way to Lula. And child number last was Newton, who married Lou Kendall, and they were the parents of John Taylor, who died in 1908, James Taylor, who married Florence Dillingham, and second, Allie Foster McFall. And the next one was Lily, who married Bynum Taylor. And that's the parents of Ola Foster, otherwise known as Patsy Foster. Okay. All right, so there is John Taylor. Then we have Andrew Jackson Taylor. I wonder who he is named after. He was known as Jackie. And so there's a present day Jackie Taylor, who was a coach round and about. And he comes from this Jackie Taylor. Jackie was the son of that William and his wife, Taylor. Over in Stevens County, buried at Carnes Creek. And he married Nancy Gilbert. And in the Civil War, he was in the Company A, 6th Georgia Cavalry. And in his application for a Confederate pension, he stated that at the Battle of Missionary Ridge, September the 12th, 1863, he was shot in the left arm and in the side of the body. Chris, you want to add anything to that?
Actually, the battle was Leeds Tanyard, which was a probing between the Federal and the Confederate cavalry before Chickamauga. So he was wounded there, and then later on, a few days later, Jerry Taylor was wounded at the Battle of Chickamauga cavalry. But it was the actual battle is when it was Leeds Tanyard, September 12th. So.
And the bullet missed his heart. If it had hit his heart, Chris wouldn't be here today.
By 1 inch.
By 1 inch, yeah.
It hit his shoulder blade and bounced, came out of his side, and then he was shot in the arm at the same time of Valley. But they were fighting against Wilder's brigade, which was famous at that time. They had repeating rifles.
That was a new thing in the Civil War.
So they did a lot of damage with the repeating rifles. So they took a lot of losses in that.
So John Taylor, he lived, if you're on Highway 17, he lived near Deer Lodge, where the road says Taylor Road. Somewhere in there was John Taylor. And Jackie Taylor was like near Unicoi Gap, Soapstone, Unicoi Gap way. Ben Taylor said this about Jackie Taylor. He was a member of the Baptist Church, lived a good and quiet life, and raised a nice and respectable family. Sounds like good words in an obituary, doesn't it? His children were Nancy Elizabeth, otherwise known as Betty, who married Dan Gurley. And some of you know about the Gurley Fields and the Gurley Place and all that. That's of those Gurleys. Mary Ann married a Rogers, and we don't know. Just don't know. They must have left and went to Texas or somewhere. Albert, that's the A.W., Chris. Albert married Emily Sosby, and they lived over White County way somewhere. Then George married first a Birch and then a Dover, and he kind of like disappears from the scene. And then there was Robert, who lived in Towns County. Rob and Lily Taylor. Most Towns Countyans, especially on the river, they remember Rob and Lily. Rob and Lily's children were Lula, who married Tom Presley. Do you know who that is? Beulah, who married Kimsey Queen. You probably know who that is. Glenn, Edgar, Walter, and Vassie that married Jimmy Garrett. And then the last one was Bartow. He moved over to Robertstown and still has family over in Robertstown. And so that's what I know about Jackie. And the youngest one of them was Jeremiah. You ever heard that name before? He was born in 1827 and died in 1904. So he's my great-great-grandfather. But his blushing, beautiful bride is not my grandma. She scares me. I can't imagine going to grandma's house and curling up in her lap. So anyhow, that's Jeremiah. So why did those three brothers move to Hiwassee River? Well, you see, they were neighbors of a man named General James R. Wiley, who had a stagecoach in at Toccoa named Traveler's Rest. And Unicoi Turnpike connected North Georgia to Tennessee. And when the Indians moved out, General Wiley bought the two-story brick house up near Mount Zion Church that was a stagecoach inn. And he needed help. So he hired those little whippersnapper tailor boys to go up to Hiwassee River and work for him. He had a large farm, a mill, all kinds of stuff up there for employment, plus travelers on the Unicoi Turnpike that they could work for. So that's why they came here, and they never left. That's not how they got their land here. How they got their land here was before the Cherokees were removed. The state of Georgia divided the Cherokee land up into 160-acre lots. And they got, you know how they disposed of it? How? By lottery. Raffle, or lottery, yes, by lottery. So, the people that were living on the land up here, mostly from North Carolina, and a few from Habersham and Franklin and White down there up here, they didn't own the land, but they wanted the land. And who won the land? Georgia people that were basically South Georgia people into flat cotton growing land. And it didn't take them long to figure out that this wasn't cotton growing country. I mean, can you imagine winning the top of Fall Mountain as your prize? Okay, so the people that really won the land and decided it wasn't for them, they were stuck with it. So what happened? There were lawyers at Clarksville. Clarksville was like the frontier of Georgia back then. And these lawyers were connecting people that won the land to the people up here that already lived here and wanted the land. So Jeremiah Taylor, let's see, he was living on the land that had been won by Pinny, Tiny Penny, Penny's orphans. So people that were orphans got free tickets. People that were lunatics got free tickets. This was kind of welfare. People that were widows of veterans got tickets. Revolutionary War or other War of 1812 veterans got free tickets. Anyhow, so Matthew Wright, the lawyer at Clarksville, hooked Jeremiah Taylor and Penny's orphans together, and they bought the land. And Ben Taylor said that how they did it was the lawyer told Jeremiah Taylor not to send the bills in one piece. Cut them in half. Send half the bill in one stagecoach mail, wait a week or so, and send the other half. So if the stagecoach got robbed, they didn't get anything. That's yeah. All right. Jeremiah Taylor, he was a justice of the peace. His wife, his first wife, that's my granny, that there's no picture of, was Mary Gilbert, and they had several kids. One of them was Harvey Pinson, the oldest one. That's mine. Adeline. Oh, Harvey Pinson picked up and left and went to Cobb County. His oldest son Jeremiah stayed here because he was already married when they moved. The next one was Adeline, who married a spy and moved to Choistoy. Then there was William Gilbert, who stayed on Owl Creek. Then there was Sarah Ann, who married a wheeler and died. Then there was Mary Jane, who just died young. John Wilburn, who moved to Banks County. Josephine, who died young. And he was in the Civil War in the 6th Georgia Cavalry. And when he came back home, roused by the spirit of the time, he named his next kid Robert E. Lee Taylor. So that's Bobby Taylor, who moved to Alabama. He was wounded in the right hand firing guns. His hand became fever, infected, and stiffened all his fingers to the point his hand was rendered essentially and substantially useless. And that was affirmed by the local doctors, and he got a pension of $25 a month. Oh wait, that's probably a year. I wrote down a month, but that can't be. He got $25 a year, and after he died, his widow, right there, got $30 a year, as long as she lived, and she lived a long time. All right. So then he marries Delilah. Then he marries Delilah Crow Lloyd. Yeah, she was the widow of Marshall Lloyd from the river. And they had 2 kids, Ben Taylor, that you've heard me talk about. And the other one was Alfred Taylor. So Jeremiah Taylor was a stock raiser, a blacksmith, a mechanic, a nurseryman, and a musician playing the violin at will. That means he played it by ear. And being a respected member of the community, he was justice of the peace of Militia District 1243 and a commissioner of the Unicoi Turnpike and the clerk of Pleasant Hill Baptist Church, which was the little log house in the Soapstone Gap. And okay. Oh, when he died in 1904, there was a big estate sale, and there was some of his stuff, but we don't need to know his stuff. He just had stuff. And his widow, so he willed everything to his son Ben. He willed everything, all his land, to his son Ben. All his grown kids were living on the place, all 160 acres. He died in 1904. Ben took possession. That meant that all those other kids had to find a place to go. So they went to Alabama and Banks County, and old Harvey, mine, went to Cobb County. He thought it'd be better living in flatland and growing cotton. Okay, so Delilah, sometime in the 1930s, she convinced, or Ben convinced, the Atlanta Constitution, she's the oldest person living in Georgia. So there was this big, long newspaper article about her, and they had her remembering James Monroe. She wasn't born until 1844. And the newspaper talked about her getting her black satin dress out of the trunk and getting all spiffed up for the article. Anyhow, all my Taylors, they never called her Granny, or they never called her Step Granny. They always called her Ben's mother. Even though she was their step grandmother. Okay. So their oldest kid was Harvey Pinson. And Harvey Pinson lived up at the Harv place up on the Spaniard. And I wondered about the Harv place. And one day when I started teaching, I heard these boys from up on the river, Owl Creek specifically, talking about they were going hunting that weekend at the Harv place. And I thought, the Harv place? Could they possibly be talking about the Harvey Taylor place? And so I asked Ken Nicholson, I guess it was, and he didn't know if it's Harv Taylor or not. It was just the Harv place. his grandfather would know. So I went to see his grandfather, Pat Garrett, and he told me, yeah, that was the Harv place. So he took me to the Harv place. How anybody lived up there, I don't know. It was way back in the mountains. The kids didn't even have a playground out in the yard. Anyhow, it was supposed to be so steep and rough that he had picked up rocks, and there were all these rock rows and rock hedges and stuff. So I took Bruce Roberts, our mountain man, up there one time, and we tried to find the fields, but we couldn't find any neat rock rows. Plenty of rocks, but we couldn't find. Yeah. So Harv. Next picture. Oh, I've got these. Here's Harv. There's the same pictures up there. My aunts would always look at that picture hanging on the wall, and my grandmother said, "Oh, poor Grandpa, he was so sick." I think he wasn't sick; he just looked like everybody else back then. This was his wife, Nancy, and this. Oh, poor Grandpa, she was so sick. Anyhow, so after 1904, when the Jeremiah Taylor place went to Ben, and all the kids had to get off, they went to Cobb County. But how did he find her? Okay. During the Civil War, she came to Towns County to help out with some of her relatives. They were Rogers. And Harv met her. After the war and after the husband came back and stuff, she went back home to Hart County, Georgia. She's my mover-inner ancestor. All the rest of my ancestors were here before her. She came in the 1860s. So after she went back home to Hart County, Georgia, Harv, according to my Uncle Homer, walked all the way to Hart County, Georgia, to bring her back as his wife. He had up some kind of a horse, mule, something or other, put her on the back, and he led it all the way. So that's how she got here. Nancy Matilda Bryan Taylor, 1846, 1911. Okay, so they go down to they go down to Cobb County, Georgia, where she promptly dies in a short time. And old Harv finds Mandy, and here's their house, and near Bell's Ferry Road. It's close to what's that mall down at the end of 515?
Towns County.
Town Center. It's close to Town Center. Yeah. And so when Nancy died, Harv got her a nice tombstone. When he died, all his kids had already Jeremiah was up here. All his other kids skedaddled and went to South Georgia and Florida and Alabama and wherever, and none of them got him a tombstone. I have contacted a bunch of relatives and I got him a tombstone. I'm not put up yet, but I have him one. He married Mandy, and none of my people ever talked about Mandy. They didn't know Mandy, and so Jason Edwards, the assistant Towns County historian, was from down in that way. So he found out about Mandy, and we found Mandy's tombstone somewhere down there, close to Dallas, Georgia. And she didn't die till 1948, but it was in Milledgeville.
Oh.
And but her people did give her tombstone. So there's a granny we didn't even know we had up here. My people never knew about her. Okay, so they had several kids. Are you bored yet? They had several kids. One of them was Jeremiah. He was known as Judd. And how he got to be named Judd is that my great uncle Grover Taylor told me that when they were little kids, Judd, or Jeremiah, and his brother Kurt were studying music. They would study their music at the table, and they would run him off because he was just a little brother. And he didn't want to be run off, so he'd go upstairs and through a knothole in the floor, he would spy on their music lessons. And he says that's how he learned his music. And so he was a little kid and he couldn't say Jerry. it came out Juddy. So he was Juddy, or when he became a man, Judd. Everybody always knew him as Judd. Okay, so Jeremiah Taylor, he's the one I'm named after. My cousin Jerry Kennedy's named after him too. He was the postmaster of Hopeland, Georgia. No, nobody remembers Hopeland, Georgia? It was the post office on Owl Creek. Yeah. When it was discontinued, the mail was sent to Mountain Scene. When Mountain Scene was discontinued, it was sent to Presley. And Presley existed till the 1950s. Oh, that's the Presley post office up there. Presley was discontinued in the 1950s. Okay? My grandmother said she did the work. He didn't. And said the post office was in a shed at Will Taylor's. There's a Hopeland, Georgia postmark, 1900, November the 28th. So, as I said, alluded to music. He was a music teacher. They learned that do, re, mi, fa, sol, la music. And this is one of his singing schools. He's in the doorway, in the arch, on the right-hand side. This is Harmony Grove in Union County Singing School. They traveled around and did all kinds of singing schools everywhere. What else you got? He's on the road again somewhere else. He's in the middle. Here's his book that he kept up with his singing schools and how much money he made at them. So there's a Young Harris School where John Pewitt paid him, I can't read, $3. J.M. Garland, $2. T.B. Pewitt, $3. J.M. Phillips, $2. So anyhow, he got really rich teaching singing schools, traveling around the country. He went like Gainesville. He went to Tennessee. He traveled all around teaching singing schools. Here's on the road again, staying with some people in Banks County. That's him in the middle top, carrying his satchel. I wish I had his satchel. Here's a song he wrote about growing up on Soapstone Gap. I can't read it, but it's Memories of Other Days. Okay. Oh, here's another song he wrote. Can you read the title? For the last 200 years, the Taylors have enjoyed corn. Liquid, too. It's true. My cousin Stephen Taylor visited over in Stevens County with all that set of Taylors over there. They like liquid corn just as much as the Taylors from Towns County liked it. So here's a song he wrote. The Curse is a Strong Drink. See, it's J. Martin Taylor, JMT. And the chorus is, strong drink is humanity's foe, 'twill drag you down to despair. No drunkard to heaven can go, no drunkard can heaven to go. Anyhow, it doesn't look like that he ever finished it. And I wondered, why did he write a song like that? And I got to thinking, you know what was going on about 1918, 1919? I figured, I've made this up, I figured the Women's Christian Temperance Union had a contest for somebody to write a song for them. And I figured he tried to write a song for them to submit. Anyhow, that's my story and I'm sticking to it. After he that's the family and the first kids. This is their house on Fodder Creek. No place ever felt like home like that house did. It was so nice to sit on the porch in the swing, and all you could hear in the good old days was the rattling of, what does the creek do? Not rattle. What's the word? What? Babble. All you could hear was the babbling of the creek. Every once in a while, an airplane, and way, way in the distance, sometimes a car. And they knew who that car was. They knew the car. I noticed all the flowers. Okay, so he was a musician. Here's his calligraphy pens. They dip in ink. Here's his bill. I wish I had his satchel thing, but I do have his bill. That song that was up there called Memories of Bygone Days, here's the printer's block. Here's the printer's block of it. And I have another printer's block that was used to publish the songs. So, you rolled it up with ink, put it down, and you had it. That's how they made the books. No, it looks just like it. It's the Taylor place. I think that they were from the same house plan. All right. So in 1928, he was a singer. In 1928, Luther Melton, who was from Towns County and had gone to Colorado or Wyoming, was killed by a train. And out west, they were a little bit more with it than we were here. They had embalming out west in the 1920s. I don't know that we were embalming here back then. So Luther Melton was embalmed and sent to Murphy on the train. His family went to Murphy, picked him up, and brought him to Fodder Creek, where they had a graveside service. J.M. Taylor was called to come and sing at the funeral, and he did. But there was an unfortunate event. Somebody came to the funeral with the measles. And before you could say, snap, crackle, pop, everybody in the county had the measles. And the commissioner quarantined the county to where there could be no public meetings, no church, no public meetings, no school, no nothing. So during that time, Jeremiah Taylor had a stroke and died. He who had led singing at all churches and funerals and bar mitzvahs and weddings could not have a funeral. So Luther Hooper and John Hooper came and cleaned the body. One of them made a box. Homer, the oldest son, was sent to Hiawassee to come up with the Baptist preacher. So the Baptist preacher went to Fodder Creek, and the family gathered on the porch, and that was the funeral. The little kids and their mother, the preacher, and that was the funeral. Then they carried him to the cemetery. Okay, so this is made in 1928. So what happened was that the middle one was my Aunt Pauline. She had already left here. She had graduated from Hiawassee Academy and got a teaching certificate and went to Skagway and taught one term of school. That school is at the Georgia Mountain Fair. She taught one term of school, got enough money to get a train ticket to Charlotte. along with Patty's with Patty's aunts or great aunts or something, and they went to Charlotte and they never came back except to visit. And so my Uncle Lem, Pauline, he told me that when the grandfather died, they had a car in Charlotte, that he brought her back home. He hadn't died yet, but he was about to die. Said he got to Franklin, and he thought he was at the end of the earth. Then they started up over the mountain and came down Shooting Creek, and the road disappeared and took to the creek. Then they finally got to Georgia and started up Fodder Creek, and they mired up to the axles and had to get Mara and Mandy's horses to drag them the rest of the way. So anyhow, and Pauline decided her mother, and Daddy was just 9 years old, they needed to get away. So they took them to Charlotte for an extended stay following the death. Okay, so, history can be black and white, but I'm going to put a little bit of color in this one. They're the ones that make it interesting. So, my grandfather had this brother named Lucius Quintus Curtis Taylor, otherwise known as Kurt. He had went with the father to Marietta. A lot of people from here went to Marietta. There were cotton mills down there. So the McAfees had two. He met and married Bonnie McAfee. That's their wedding picture. They had two kids, Walter and Reuben. Kurt had a wandering eye, or a roving manner. He upped and left the country and left Bonnie with two little kids. Bonnie wasn't going to be stuck with two little kids. She took them to the old Taylor grandparents and left them on the porch. So Harvey Pinson Taylor said, "We're too old to raise kids. We can't raise kids." He took them to the courthouse and let them be bound out. That was like putting in foster care or making apprentices. So those two little kids, born 1905 and 1908 or so, were bound out. But they were adopted. They were bound out to a rich person that owned the Marietta Hardware. And so they were given a good education, a good life. Then one day, Mr. and Mrs. Hardware decided they didn't want to be Mr. and Mrs. anymore. And she upped and went to New York. She took Walter. Reuben stayed with the dad. Good educated and stuff. Walter became the bacteriologist of the city of Atlanta and ran for mayor of Atlanta at one time. He didn't win, but shows you his qualifications. Walter, that went to New York, became an engineer. And he had a home in Florida, too. Imagine that. And he had a motorcycle. And he would go from New York to Florida on his motorcycle, passing through Fodder Creek, stopping at my grandmother's, usually leaving a present. And the present that they cherished and enjoyed the most was an electric frying pan. And they used that electric frying pan for every reunion to make the fried chicken in. Okay, all right. There he is when he, right after he left Georgia and went to Amarillo, Texas, and was in the music business. There he is in later life that most people here that remember him looking like that. J. William Denton used to talk about old Kurt Taylor so much. He said, he wore makeup. He colored his hair. He liked his mustache. So, Kurt Taylor. So, he's in the music publishing business. And so there's his Melodies for Jesus that was published in Amarillo, Texas. Here's his Joyous Praise. And it's got my grandfather's name in there too. J.M. Taylor, J. Martin Taylor, and L.Q.C. Taylor. Lucius Quintus Curtis Taylor. My uncle said it really stood for Long Court Cure the Toothache. He was from New Mexico to Iowa to Texas to Arkansas to Georgia and to Franklin, North Carolina. He was all over the place. He never made a census except for the one when he was a baby in Towns County. He never made a census. Don't know if he was on the run or what. In 1915 or thereabouts, he took an extended vacation to a famous condominium known as Fort Leavenworth. And sometime in that time, he was summoned to New York City to be a witness in a music copyright trial. So he was around and about. So about 1950, he came back to North Georgia, where he was giving singing schools in the Coochie Valley and White County and all in that area. And you know what was going on in White County, Georgia? Helen, at that time,
I'd climb the highest mountain.
I'd climbed the highest mountain. Hollywood had come to town, so everybody came to Helen. All my aunts and cousins from Charlotte couldn't wait to get to Helen to see Rory Calhoun, William Lundigan, and Susan Hayward. And they camped out. Well, Kurt Taylor was right there teaching singing schools. He couldn't wait to get in the action either. He landed the job as the choir director in the church scene when the little kid's having a funeral. He's up there singing How Firm the Foundation. And while he was there, with all those reporters from Atlanta, can you read that? He got $300 for that story. My Uncle Homer told me he got $300 for that story. I was on the Titanic. Now, Titanic was like 1911 or 12 or somewhere in there. This is 1950. Nobody had ever heard of him being on the Titanic. But after it comes out in the Atlanta Constitution, he's famous, especially around here. He was on the Titanic. He was no more on the Titanic than I was. But he has grandchildren that insist he was. So his story was that when he went to Texas, he got a job on a big ranch as the music teacher for ranchers' children. And while he was teaching them, an opportunity came to take those two children, their last name was Slaughter, to take those children to the Tonic Fosso Law School of Music in London. So they went. And then when they came back, they were on the Titanic. Jason Edwards has researched. There wasn't any Slaughters living in that county that he said he was in. And the only Taylor that was on the Titanic, there was a L.C. Taylor on the Titanic, but he was a fireman. I imagine he could have stowed away. I highly doubt it. You know, they say a sailor has a wife in every port. Kurt Taylor had a wife in every town. He had children from 1905 to 1949. And most of them don't know about each other. Through Jason Edwards' research and me telling him what to look for, we have found at least 10 children. And they don't know about each other. So it's kind of interesting to talk to them. The youngest one is named Curtis. He lives in Jacksonville, Florida. So that last family, here's the story how he got his last family. So he was here, Gainesville, around and about teaching, and he ended up in Franklin with a singing school. And there was this old widow in the class. Imagine that, a widow with property. So he started paying particular attention to this widow with property. She didn't return his favors, but she had this young daughter. So he married the daughter. It was all about trying to get the property. And so they had like 4 kids. And my grandmother knew about this wife. They actually liked this wife. And they always corresponded and stuff. I never met her, but I've met all her children. So, back to my ancestors. He wasn't a saint either. So old Kurt, when he was traveling around and about, he got into nefarious predicaments, evidently one of which was the passing money. So he evidently brought money back to Towns County for his brother to pass. And his brother, my grandfather, was caught in Athens, Georgia on the streets passing money. And I think, how in the world was he doing in Athens? But he traveled all over the place. So he got caught passing money and had an extended stay at the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary when it was brand new. So that was kept secret. Nobody ever said anything about that. That was hush hush. Now, how did I find out about that? You know, they had an old reed organ. And I love the old reed organ. And so one day I got prowling in the papers that were in there, the old song books and papers and stuff. And I found this big, long legal document. And it had T.H. Roosevelt's name on it. I knew enough to know that people collected famous people's signatures for money. And I thought, oh, that's Teddy Roosevelt. And so I read the paper, and it had this word on it, counterfeiting. And I didn't know what that word meant. So I took the paper to my grandmother, and I said, Mama, what does that mean? She said, child, where'd you see that? I said, right here. She said, let me have that. I never saw it again. It was a presidential pardon from Teddy Roosevelt for Jeremiah Taylor. So later on, I kept remembering that. And I thought, I want to see where that is in the records. I got to have it. So when Justin Shook, you remember from a previous program, when Justin Shook at one time worked as an aide to Sal Miller. And I thought, Justin, my grandfather got a presidential pardon. Look up those records in Washington, D.C. and get me a copy. Well, they looked high and wide, low and far and wide. They could not find it. And I thought, I was hallucinating. I can't have remembered that. I'm just dreaming. So, you've heard of Jason Edwards' assistant historian. I put it to him. He found the copy in the records and archives. And yes, he did spend about, he had kids in 1900 and 1902. Then there was a spell from 2 to 5. There were no kids. So that's when he was in the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, and he got pardoned. And so the twins were the next kids after he got out of the penitentiary. Okay, let's see. Patty brought this in. This is from Kurt Taylor, teaching a singing school at Macedonia. I mean, he was a movie star. He was a star. Everybody loved him. And when I was coming along, people would say, when I'd say I was a Taylor, that hooked me up to Kurt Taylor, and that hooked me up to Judd Taylor. So I grew up in their shadow. And kind of in conclusion with what Ben Taylor said. Oh, here's what Ben Taylor said about himself. He said, I can't do much but read and write, and that's mostly what I do from morning till night. I read of the future, write of the past, all summed up, not much at last, but it keeps me busy and the mind content and off the hardships I've underwent. I just thought of something else. Okay, let's see. Ben Taylor had crippling arthritis, and that's what he did. He read and write from morning till night and wrote of things. He wrote political satires. He wrote funny stories like Who Made the First Cream Gravy. He made political commentaries like in the election of 1948, let's swap the jackass in. About the Talmadges. And he wrote personal things. And this is his daughter Inez. I love the poem. I'll read you part of it. My daughter Inez went to work in the plant, but got married, got wearied with the work and thought it was scant. She couldn't complain of the work or the fare, but she thought she'd do better to marry a millionaire. And thought they'd take the money and have some good times, but it was all tied up. It was all in bonds, but just a few dimes. Then they were gone soon, and they began to roam, and she began to think of going back home. But when she got back from the trip, she felt a little sad, but picked up the courage to write to her dad. She says, I got married while I was in a craze, but it only lasted for 17 days. And I'm now back and living in town. And my name, by God, is Inez Brown. Oh, I got another one. Okay, so I'll tell you, it's political stuff. So at one point he was on the welfare. And Elaine England was over the welfare. And Eugene Taylor, his nephew, was on the welfare board, the chairman of the board. And they cut him off the welfare because he sold some timber, so he had income. And he got PO'd, and he wrote this. Elaine and Eugene are my shepherds, and I am in dire want. They guideth me out of assistance. They leadeth me through great forests for his son's sake. That was right. Yea, they roll me through the valley of soup kitchens, and I am hungry. I also fear evil, for they are against me. Their ways and authority discourage me. They prepared a reduction in my income in the presence of my creditors. They anointed my income with timber. He sold timber. So my expense is greater than my income. Surely poverty and hard times will follow me as long as they stay in office, and I shall eat soup forever. My Aunt Pearl said that he was a really smart guy. His only education was at the little log house in Soapstone Gallery. But if he had had education, she said, he could have been governor of Georgia. I love this picture. It doesn't have anything, but it's his wife Ethel at the Georgia Mountain Fair at one time. I just love it. And she's talking to Edie Ann Bradshaw. Okay, so there were these three Taylor brothers. You know, they were all about music, the whole generation. And so there were these three Taylor brothers that went to Michigan. They were some that went north instead of west. So they liked corn in Michigan too. So they would get their paycheck, and it might not last for the weekend. Then they wouldn't have money for rent and food. So they staged revivals. Lon would do the preaching. Louis would do the singing. And Walford would work the crowd. True story, but I love it. I love it. And so I've given you my Taylor line, and that's my father, John Guy Taylor, who was born on Fodder Creek, 1919, 9 years old when his daddy died. All the older brothers and sisters had gone to Hiawassee Academy, so they had a good education, like that Aunt Pauline that was a school teacher. They had a good education. And then after the dad died, money dried up. He also had a nursery, and in addition to traveling singing schools, he peddled nursery stuff. No, go back. And so the last two kids didn't have opportunity to go to school. So Ruth went to Charlotte to babysit her older sister's children while she worked. Daddy, my grandmother figured out how to send him to school. She was going to make him a preacher. So the first day of school at Hiawassee Academy, in whatever year it was, 1930-something, she had him baptized and enrolled in school. He was going to be a preacher. Preachers had scholarship money for it. So that's what it was going to be. It didn't happen. But he did manage to graduate in 1937, and he wrote, there was no public transportation from Fodder Creek to Hiawassee Academy, so he rode a bicycle, and in good weather. And in bad weather, when you mired up to the axle on Fodder Creek, he, Jess Spivey, and Underwood man batched at the Dr. Rice place. One would bring flour, one would bring meat, they had it all fixed out. So there you go. There you go. So in conclusion, like what Ben Taylor said, this is a description of the Taylor race for the ones that have lived in this place that I know about. But as to what they'll do or where they'll go, ask somebody else. I do not know. Thank you.
Sure, you're a hard act to follow. That was great. Thanks for sharing the good and the bad.
Well, the color makes it interesting.
There you go. Yeah, if we all just.
Sorry. Oh. So,
He's got something else.
okay, so they were involved in public activities besides the church. The ones that I can think of, and I'm sure there has to be more. Mr. Kendall back there was the county school superintendent forever and county commissioner. Ray Taylor was commissioner who had the courthouse then. Jerry Kendall was over the Department of Family and Children's Services forever. And let's see, there was somebody else I thought of, but I can't think of them right now. Let's see if I can find it. Oh, and Terry Taylor's with the Georgia Mountain Fair. And then James Emmett Taylor was in law enforcement that gave his life. And I'm sure there's more.
Larry Taylor was also a board member of the Blue Ridge Foundation.
Okay, thank you. And there's more. And there can be people that don't have the Taylor name that come from the Taylors that I don't know to think of.
And Noel Taylor was very beloved. Police officer.
Thank
Jelly.
you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Jerry, this is Jim Taylor's great granddaughter, and I think she's got some pictures.
Oh, I just have this old picture. This is the Taylors. So this is Jim Taylor, and this is Vaughn, which is his great grandfather. And this is Ada, Aunt Ada, who lived over near Deer Lodge. And y'all tell me that Noy, they called him Noy. But it was Noy. I didn't know him well. Noel. And then this is my good-looking grandfather, Alvin. And then this is their mama, which was Lou. This is my old. This is a
Thank you. I'd like to have a copy of that.
Yeah.
Anybody else that you can think of?
My grandfather, Jim Kendall, he was
Jim Kendall, Jerry's grandfather, was tax commissioner,
tax receiver
tax receiver.
for 16 years, I think.
So they were in public service, and there's probably more that you didn't have the Taylor name. So I couldn't cover everything, but that's my personal story.
You did a good job. Like I say, the good, bad, and the ugly. But we all have that in our ancestors, and we might as well own it.
My Charlotte cousins kind of raised their eyebrows when they found out Grandpa had been in the federal
It was near that.
They didn't mind talking about Kurt. So when when Jeremiah died in 1928, he had all this music that was written on paper, and Kurt came by and volunteered to take the music and have it published and give them all the money. Well, she never saw any money, but they saw these little gospel songbooks with LQC Taylor on and no J.M. Taylor. And as I said, Kurt was a traveling man. So when they would have supper at Fodder Creek and there were any leftovers, they didn't throw them away. They put them and they saved them. The saying was, Kurt might come in tonight. And Ben Taylor's, yeah. Yeah, I've heard those stories. So
Uncle Homer told me this story, that Ben Taylor and Kurt Taylor were going somewhere one time to a job. And they didn't have any money. And so they were getting kind of hungry, and it was about mealtime. So they came to a house, and they stopped at the house to way off. He didn't even make the house. Gave him lunch, but it was 10 cents. And they didn't have it, but they would pay them. They would go to the job, and when they came back from the job, they'd stop and pay them. So coming back from the job, as they got close to the house, Ben started straightening the house, and Kurt started veering off.
Jason Edwards a couple of times as the assistant county historian, and he is going to be doing the program in November. So, and it's on
A virtual tour of Ivy Mount Cemetery.
a virtual tour of Ivy Mount Cemetery. And, a few years ago, y'all, I don't know if any of y'all were around to take the tour, but we did a tour of Ivy Mount, and it was really fun. We want to do that again some year, not this year, but anyway, a lot of ancestors are buried there. So, and Jerry, do you have any ancestors still buried at the historic Burke Cemetery?
I have tons buried at Burke Cemetery, but all mine were moved when they.
Yeah, okay.
Did y'all record anything from the historic tour of Ivy Mount?
No, we did not.
Back
They
then,
did a great job. I just wondered if y'all would.
I forgot what I was looking for. Hang on just a minute. I've lost it. I forgot what I was going for.
Ivy Mount Cemetery, maybe?
My Taylors were too wealthy, and Jeremiah married Rosa Nicholson. They weren't wealthy either, but they did have land, and so in 1919, okay, they had the old reed organ that you heard me talk about, and so Mama gave me the old reed organ, and so I knew that my Aunt Ruth kind of wanted it for her parlor, and I said to Mama, but Aunt Ruth wants it. She said, my money bought it. I could do with it what I want. I often wondered what that meant, and I figured it out. Her mother died about 1990. Her daddy died about 1920. Her grandmother died in the same period. She came into her inheritance because in that year, 1920, they got a car. They got a new house. And they got a reed organ. It's her money. I'm sure it's her money that got all that.
So that's the story of the beginning of Jerry Taylor's obsession with reed organs.